Welcome back to Klepper's Corner, Today in History. Today we're traveling across centuries of human ambition, tragedy, invention, and the occasional reminder that civilization is basically a fragile stack of decisions held together with optimism and duct tape. March 8th turns out to be one of those days where history manages to contain philosophy, revolutions, aviation milestones, global wars, and a missing airplane that still haunts modern technology. So let's wander through time together and see how humanity once again proved that brilliance and chaos are often roommates. Segment 1, Scholars, Epics, and Medieval Power Struggles. The ancient world loved its philosophers, but it also had a nasty habit of occasionally murdering them. In the year 415 AD, the city of Alexandria lost one of its greatest minds when Hypatia, a mathematician and philosopher, was killed by a religious mob during a bitter political struggle between church leadership and Roman authorities. Hypatia wasn't just an intellectual celebrity. She taught astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics to elite students from across the Roman world. Her death shocked the Mediterranean intellectual community and symbolized something bigger than one brutal crime. It felt like the slow sunset of classical learning and the beginning of an era where ideology sometimes carried more weight than inquiry. Meanwhile, centuries later and far to the east, the Persian poet Ferdowsi was doing the exact opposite of destroying knowledge. He was preserving it. After 33 years of work, he completed the Shahnameh in 1010, a massive epic poem chronicling Persian myth and history in more than 50,000 couplets. Think of it as the Persian equivalent of combining the Iliad, the Odyssey, and an entire national history textbook into one giant poetic monument. The book preserved the Persian language and cultural identity during a time when foreign rule threatened to erase it. And in a plot twist that sounds suspiciously like something from a historical sitcom, the king who promised Ferdowsi gold for the work reportedly paid him in silver instead. Ferdowsi gave the money away out of pure spite and wrote a savage poem mocking the king. Somewhere in literary heaven, Shakespeare probably gave him a respectful nod. Segment 2, When Citizens, Castles, and Empires Collide. The Middle Ages were full of knights, castles, and elaborate feudal hierarchies. But every once in a while, the ordinary townspeople decided they'd had enough of the aristocratic pecking order. In 1262, the wealthy trading city of Strasbourg clashed with its ruling prince-bishop in the Battle of Hausbergen. The bishop showed up with armored cavalry and professional soldiers, confident that a bunch of merchants and craftsmen would fold instantly. Instead, the city militia won. Bakers, blacksmiths, and merchants defeated elite knights and secured Strasbourg's independence as a free imperial city. It was a rare moment where the medieval social ladder briefly flipped upside down. At almost the same time, the Crusader world was experiencing the opposite kind of turning point. The massive fortress known as Crac des Chevaliers, considered nearly impossible to capture, faced the armies of the Mamluk Sultan Baybars in 1271. Rather than waste thousands of soldiers storming the walls, Baybars used psychological warfare. He forged a letter that appeared to come from the Crusaders' own leadership, ordering the defenders to surrender. The knights believed it and opened the gates. One forged letter brought down one of the strongest castles on earth. Medieval history sometimes reads like chess played with swords. Segment 3, Kings, Revolutions, and Frontier Tragedy. Moving into the early modern era, March 8th also reminds us that power can change hands in the strangest ways. King William III of England died in 1702 after falling from his horse when it tripped over a molehill. That's right, a monarch who survived wars across Europe was taken out by a tiny dirt mound. His political enemies later jokingly toasted the mole as the little gentleman in black velvet. If history teaches anything, it's that destiny occasionally wears very small shoes. Across the Atlantic world, decades later, another March 8th marked one of the darkest episodes of the American frontier. In 1782, Pennsylvania militia killed 96 Christian Lenape people in the Gnadenhutten massacre. These villagers were pacifists who had converted to Christianity and tried to stay neutral during the American Revolution. The militia promised to escort them to safety, then held a vote and decided to kill them instead. The tragedy shattered trust between native nations and American settlers, fueling generations of conflict. History loves to celebrate triumphs, but days like this remind us that the past also contains some very uncomfortable truths. Segment 4, Engineering, Diplomacy, and the Industrial Age. The 19th century brought revolutions of a different kind. Instead of swords and crowns, the battlefield became engineering and national identity. In 1844, Iceland reopened its ancient parliament, the Althing, after decades of Danish rule. The institution dated all the way back to the Viking Age, making it one of the oldest parliamentary traditions in the world. Restoring it became a key step toward Iceland's eventual independence. It also showed that sometimes the most powerful revolutions involve paperwork instead of gunpowder. Meanwhile, in 1855, engineer John A. Roebling tested the Niagara Suspension Bridge by sending a steam locomotive onto it. Thousands of spectators expected the bridge to collapse into the raging river below. Instead, it held perfectly. That moment changed engineering forever by proving suspension bridges could support heavy rail traffic. Without that success, the Brooklyn Bridge and countless other modern bridges might never have existed. So the next time you casually drive across a massive suspension bridge, you can thank a 19th century engineer who decided to test his work with a train and a crowd of nervous onlookers. Segment 5, Revolution, Aviation, and the 20th Century. March 8th also sits at the crossroads of major 20th century upheavals. In 1917, women protesting bread shortages in Petrograd marched through the streets demanding food and political change. What started as a demonstration quickly grew into mass strikes and protests. Within days, the Russian Empire collapsed, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. The revolution that reshaped global politics began not with armies or generals, but with hungry workers demanding bread. Just a few years earlier, in 1910, aviation history quietly changed when Raymond de la Roche received the first pilot's license issued to a woman. Early airplanes were fragile contraptions made of wood and fabric, and flying them required both courage and a casual disregard for personal safety. De la Roche proved women could master the skies just as well as men. Of course, her aristocratic title, Baroness, turned out to be completely invented, which means the first licensed female pilot in history was also, technically, a very successful rebranding campaign. Segment 6, War, Culture, and the Modern World. World War II added its own entry to the March 8th timeline, when Japanese forces captured Rangoon in 1942, cutting off a major supply route to China. The fall of the city shook Allied strategy across Asia and forced dangerous air supply missions over the Himalayas. War often turns geography into strategy and ports into lifelines. Later, in 1965, U.S. Marines landed at Da Nang, marking the first major deployment of American combat troops in Vietnam. Officially, it was supposed to be a limited mission to protect an airbase. History, as usual, had other plans. The conflict escalated into one of the most controversial wars in modern American history. And then there was a very different kind of global spectacle in 1971, when Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier fought the legendary Fight of the Century. The bout became a cultural symbol during a deeply divided era in American politics and society. When Frazier knocked Ali down in the final round, the moment became one of the most famous scenes in boxing history. Segment 7, Modern Mysteries and Human Limits. In the late 20th century, medicine pushed its own boundaries. In 1985, surgeons attempted multiple heart transplants in a desperate effort to save a patient named Thomas Creighton. The marathon surgical effort highlighted both the promise and the ethical challenges of organ transplantation. It helped drive improvements in transplant systems that save lives today. And then, in 2014, the world watched in disbelief as Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared from radar. A massive modern airliner carrying 239 people simply vanished into the vastness of the Indian Ocean. Despite one of the largest search operations ever conducted, the plane's final resting place remains unknown. In a world filled with satellites and sensors, that disappearance became a haunting reminder that even modern technology doesn't eliminate every mystery. In conclusion, March 8th is a remarkable snapshot of human history. Philosophers seeking knowledge, poets preserving culture, cities fighting for independence, engineers reshaping the landscape, revolutions erupting in snowy streets, and modern aircraft vanishing into the unknown. History never moves in a straight line. It zigzags through triumph, tragedy, innovation, and sometimes a horse tripping over a molehill. If nothing else, March 8th proves that humanity's story is messy, unpredictable, occasionally inspiring, and always worth exploring.